Welcome to New England Hyperbaric Oxygen Therapy. We're going to go over some of the mechanisms of hyperbaric oxygen today, and we have a slideshow with some pictures to help us in that process. So here, what we're pointing out is that hyperbaric oxygen therapy is elevated oxygen plus elevated pressure. Okay, and so when we have increased oxygen and we increase our pressure, we have tremendous healing benefits, which we're going to go over more. Here is showing some imaging that shows the increases in blood flow after hyperbaric oxygen therapy, one session. And you can see the increases in red and yellow and green, but especially red, that really increase circulation. Circulation gets more oxygen, gets more nutrients, gets more metabolism of our brain cells, which we can infer creates neuroplasticity. Here's just another picture of hyperbaric oxygen. This is one of the milder chambers, which are very safe, have really no side effects per se. The only side effects that people have sometimes are in the inner ear and within your inner ear, inside your tympanic membrane or your eardrum. There's usually a little air sac for people. That's kind of where air bubbles get built up, and as pressure increases and that little bubble decreases in size, what happens is it kind of tugs on your tympanic membrane here and just kind of gives it a little irritation, but goes right. It's only for a few people. This is not a common thing, but it happens, and all you do is clear the airway and get the oxygen out, or get the pressure out in there, and it works really well. So hyperbaric oxygen therapy has two major mechanisms of action that we can look at. One of them is the increase in oxygen within our circulation, and the other is the modulation of gene expression. Okay, and they both are equally important. They both rely on each other, but when we look at hyperbaric oxygen with the increasing oxygen concentration, what we're doing is we're getting more oxygen into all the fluids of our blood, the blood plasma, cerebrospinal fluid, and the lymphatic tissue and fluid, and that's as a direct result of the increasing pressure. The gene expression relies on some of that increase in oxygen to occur, as well as the increase in pressure, creating changes in the way that our DNA codes for proteins, or like the blueprints of all of our hormones and cells and tissues. So what happens is we get really long-term effects from the gene modulation with hyperbaric oxygen. We're going to go over that a lot more, and that's going to clear up a little bit more for us. But really what I want you to understand is just that the gene expression that occurs with hyperbaric, which is well established, and also the increase in oxygen in all the fluids of our tissue. And we're going to talk about why that's important in just a minute. So what I want to talk about is just a little bit of normal physiology. I know this is probably everybody understands this, but it's just important. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but essentially, when we look at how we get oxygen into to an organ or cell or tissue, we have to first breathe it in, right? So it comes in to the lungs, and then it goes into these little air sacs called alveoli, but just think about them as an air sac. That's all they are, sac of air. And what they do is oxygen, as it's in here, it then crosses this little membrane and attaches to our red blood cells. Remember, these are little dots or oxygen molecules, so we're attaching them to the red blood cells. Each red blood cell can carry over 1 billion oxygen molecules, which is quite incredible. But that tells you how small oxygen molecules are. And so normally we need these red blood cells to carry oxygen to our tissues. So in our organs and cells, and I say tissues, I mean every cell in our body, essentially. So without, and we need good circulation for that, and we need plenty of red blood cells. Plenty of red blood cells. But we only have so many red blood cells, okay? So we do have a maximum amount of red blood cells. And that maximum amount is called our carrying capacity. And that carrying capacity, which is right up here, if you read that, is determined by red blood cell levels, as we said, and their binding ability. And most of us are at maximum. If we have normal lungs, we're breathing in. If you've ever had a little pulse ox, which is what they put on your finger when you go to the doctors, and it says like 97, 98, 99, 100%, whatever. That really is looking at how many hemoglobin sites are bound by oxygen on red blood cells. What that means is if you're in the 97 to 100%, you're pretty much maxed out. Normal is like 95 to 99, I believe. So we have plenty of air left over in our lungs. So we're not really using all of the oxygen that we breathe in. That's why we can resuscitate somebody, okay? So if we can give somebody CPR, we can get more oxygen in their system because we still have oxygen left over in our lungs. So in our lungs, these are our lungs, we still have about 75% of the oxygen we breathed in left over. So there's a lot of extra oxygen that is wasted, would be a strong word, but we're going to use the word wasted or not utilized, would probably be a better way to say it. And that's pretty important because we'd like to use it, and we actually can use it with what we're going to talk about today, obviously with the hyperbaric oxygen therapy, because we're actually able to get more of that extra oxygen out and put it directly into the plasma, or the fluid. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but the fluid of our blood instead of needing red blood cells, which is really cool. And because there's no other way to increase our red blood cell count other than with drugs. Erythropoietin is a drug that increases. That's what Lance Armstrong used illegally. And Olympic athletes train at high altitudes to kind of increase a few red blood cells. It's more of a physiological response. But normally, for most of us, we just don't have any options for that. But hyperbaric oxygen does allow us to have that, which is really cool and exciting, and that's what allows us to do what we want to do and heal, which is what we're talking about today. So here we see, and like I said, I got a little ahead of myself, but under hyperbaric, something happens which is really important, and it's physics, it's physiological, but it's physics. It's Henry's law of gases. As pressure increases, as we increase pressure, we directly increase the ability for a gas to dissolve into a liquid. So for oxygen to go into our plasma, or cerebrospinal fluid, or lymphatic fluid, but especially the plasma, okay? And the plasma is what you see in this picture, well, either one of these pictures, but that's what you're seeing everywhere that's not a red blood cell. So these are red blood cells. Everywhere else is plasma. All of this squiggly lines, and actually over 50% of our circulation is plasma. So we have a lot of real estate there, and it's carrying hormones and proteins and stuff, but there's really plenty of space to use. So when we get into that hyperbaric chamber and we increase the pressure, it goes from normal, which is over here, to this, which is getting, and it actually is much more concentrated even than that, probably, but it increases our percentage of oxygen up to 1,200% with the really deeper, strong pressure chambers, which we don't use in my office. That's more of a hospital grade, but it's not something you need for most conditions unless you're, lost all your blood, or you're just had a heart attack, or all of these things, which are going to be in a hospital anyway. So that's a lot of increase, which is really cool. So that's really important. So oxygen comes through our lungs and it dissolves directly into the plasma. And so it goes directly into that fluid like we talked about here, right? So instead of only being carried by red blood cells, as we said here, it now is carried also by plasma. So we have now two mechanisms to carry oxygen, which really, sorry for the handwriting here, I'm drawing on this thing. So we really increase our ability to get oxygen to our tissue. And also, like I said, each red blood cell can carry 1 billion oxygen molecules. So these oxygen molecules are really tiny. Normally, of course, you wouldn't be able to see them really here. And so what happens is they can get deeper and farther into your tissue, and they can squeeze through areas that red blood cells can't, like narrowing of blood vessels for varying reasons. And red blood cells kind of can't get through there. They get kind of clumped up. So we can still get lots of oxygen into those areas, and that allows us to heal. And it supersaturates our oxygen, our bloodstream. And then oxygen makes energy, right? So that oxygen turns into energy, which turns into whatever we need it for, healing or growth, all of these things. So we kind of look at this. We've talked about a few of these things already, how many red blood cells, how many oxygen molecules a red blood cell carries. You have high oxygen concentrations in the blood plasma. But what we didn't talk about is that encourages it to be pushed deeper into our tissues as we go from high concentration to low concentration in the diffusion gradient. So the oxygen in our plasma actually goes farther into our tissue than normally does with red blood cells, because there's such a concentration here in science or just physiology. Things always want to go from high concentration to low concentration, so they get pushed farther into your tissue. So they actually get deeper than normally would. And also, of course, the pressure that is increased within our vessels and all these things actually pushes stuff in and out of our tissue more. So we're actually pushing blood flow, or oxygen, deeper into our tissue and nutrients. And we're also pumping our waste from our tissues, metabolites, toxins, into our bloodstream to excrete. So into our lymphatic system, lymphatic fluid too. So we're getting detoxification, which is extremely important, and something that hyperbaric really helps tremendously with, because it's actually pushing stuff in and out. You can do a lot of things to help with detox, but this is one of those methods that really just gets it in and out, gets it moving, which is really important. And so that's how hyperbaric oxygen therapy works on the elevated oxygen side of it. And, of course, we said that it makes energy, which creates healing and growth and rebuilding. And, you need energy for anything. It's the gas. It's the thing that gets us from one point to another, so we need it. But the other aspect, the other mechanism that we haven't talked about too much yet, but is the genomic changes that are impacted by the high oxygen, and also the pressure changes. And what happens is that when we increase oxygen, every organism is from algae to human beings is susceptible to pressure and oxygen gradients and changes. We see it with people who have migraines or headaches when a storm rolls through and pressure decreases, and then a high pressure system comes in and changes, and it really affects people in ways. But a higher pressure actually is very favorable, as it turns on or flips on gene signaling that actually promotes growth factors, which are hormones that are necessary for regeneration and healing. and it actually suppresses and it activates anti-inflammatory genomic responses, and it suppresses inflammation and programs cell death, and turns off the gene expression for those guys. So let's look at another picture here and talk about a little bit more about that. But what we're looking at is that hyperbaric affects DNA, and so this is the longer. It's a longer acting mechanism. So we're elevated oxygen. Once we get out of the chamber, it lasts for another 30 to 60 minutes. Depends on a lot of things maybe, but the improvement in our genetic expression really lasts like a day or more. So it gives a lot of time for things to heal. I'm sorry, guys. It's really hard to write cleanly on this thing. It lasts a day or more, and that's really how we are seeing that. The treatment of wounds and things is through the modulating of genes. Obviously, the elevated oxygen, all those things are major parts of it, but this is just as important or more important as that. It's a little harder to kind of understand if you don't have a science background, but if you can understand that the hyperbaric tells our DNA to release certain signals that make proteins and hormones, as they are hormones that we need to stimulate growth. Okay, and it also results in stimulation of these anti-inflammatory genes and producing hormones that help with that, and pro-inflammatory, and suppresses the things that would cause inflammation and cell death. So we're really increasing the growth and health and reducing inflammation while actually. So we're telling things to do that. We're also suppressing the things that would say the opposite and increase inflammation. So we've identified over 8,101 genes, or exactly 8,101 genes that respond to pressure and oxygen. And like we said, that goes on for a day or more. And we talked about, everything does this. And each one of these, we have 8,101 genes in every cell in our body. So every cell is susceptible to these changes. Excuse me. So we have in every cell the potential to stimulate the growth, inflammation, and the DNA through DNA, as well as reducing inflammation every time we go into the chamber. And what we've understood is that when we do the longer protocols, 40 plus visits, and that can be more for some people, and these types of things. But when we have those longer protocols, that's when we get more of the genetic expression changes. So that's when we get more DNA affected. So that's why we like these longer protocols, versus, if you want to make some quick changes, you certainly can. We see it all the time with people. But the longer protocols will really work on the genetic coding in hormones. And here we just explain what a hormone is here, chemical messengers that stimulate growth and development, among other aspects, right? So one of the really cool examples of this is through new blood vessel formation that you can see here that's happening. With hyperbaric. I'm getting a little ahead of myself again, but the let's go here. So hyperbaric stimulates new blood vessel growth, and it does this through those genetic activations that stimulate these vascular endothelial growth factors and these endothelial progenitor cells. Basically, these growth factors that give the the signals and everything needs a signal, right? You need to turn something on for it to do that. So it gives us signals and the right messages to bring everybody together to build these new blood vessels. So we actually get new blood vessels to carry oxygen the old-fashioned way through red blood cells for long-term changes. And so we get, let's say you have an occlusion or some problem where you have inflammation that's blocking. We're actually going to build a stronger reservoir and supply of oxygen through hyperbaric over the long term. Now, we need to do these longer protocols to create this, but it results in the healing and maintenance of this. So not only do we maintain what we already had, we now have extra blood vessels, which to me is remarkable, and it should be to you. But it provides all these necessary pieces of the puzzle that really result in long-term tremendous changes, as well as short-term, obviously. When you increase blood flow, we're already increasing oxygen and the things we need, but now we're building these other bridges to bring in everything we need. So that's that, which is really cool. And here you can see that it's just a picture that shows a little bit about the laws that create this oxygen scenario. So we want those genetic changes in the cell, but we still need the increased oxygen to help with that too. So we have to get this oxygen to the body, to all the cells, and we do that by getting it in all the fluids and in high concentration. So you can see here oxygen is throughout all these fluids in our body, not just carried by red blood cells anymore, but it's everywhere, and it's going all throughout our body. We only have so much blood flow, okay? We only have about 5.5 liters of oxygen, and it can't be everywhere at once. So in order to get the amount of oxygen that we need, we have to pump it one place over another. Let's say if we're throwing something, we need to get it to the arm, we need to stabilize our thoracic, we need to get some to our legs to brace, we need to get some to our brain to coordinate it. And so, what happens to the extra oxygen, right, in other places? So with hyperbaric, we get to have it everywhere. And so it's doing this all at once. And it's doing that because it was able to dissolve into the plasma. Little reminder there. That was Henry's law. That's this one. And then it actually shrinks the molecules. So in allowing it to, bypass these membranes, and that's Boyle's law. So those aren't really important for you. It's just interesting to me, but it just gets more oxygen in so that we can heal. And that's what you need to remember. It does that through the genetic changes, and it does that through those increases in oxygen that creates energy. And for you science people, that's ATP, right? And you knew that already. But here's another picture. This just shows the brain being hyperoxygenated, supersaturated, which is a lot of the work that I do and really important in anything, any neurological conditions and any function. This is happening throughout your entire body, of course. Remember that, every cell. But it's happening also in the brain, and that's important to just understand, as opposed to just kind of being carried here and through the circulation. And if there's circulation issues, it might not get there as well. But here, it doesn't matter if you have circulation issues or whatever. And if you do have circulation issues, guess what? It's not going to last very long, because you're going to get these new blood vessels growing that are going to branch out and cover the span of the brain better over the long term through that vascular endothelial growth factors and those progenitor cells. So that's really important. And oxygen is what we use to make create energy for our brain cells or our neurons to grow and heal and create what we call neuroplasticity, which is the reorganization and growth of synapses and connections between brain cells. So basically, everything's connected in the brain. And so the more oxygen we have, the more highly connected these are. And that means faster transmission of signals, which means more accurate information, faster processing, basically just a healthy brain. the more synapses you have, the better your brain's going to function. And that's just the way it goes, and that's called neuroplasticity. So you can look that up if you want, but it's really cool. It's really cool because it's how we do anything, create any kind of new neural networks in the brain. I love the video. If you just search neuroplasticity and Centis in YouTube, there's a great video that describes neuroplasticity. It's like how we change, how you learn anything new. It's basically learning in the brain or change. And it's neither good nor bad, right? You can learn bad things, you can learn good things. You just want to direct them the right way. Here's a cool picture of after 40 treatments of hyperbaric, right? So that means we've had plenty of time to have oxygen create the healing that we want, and we've also had plenty of time for the increase in pressure and the increase in oxygen to create those DNA changes, right? And the signaling changes to release for growth and healing and suppress inflammation, right? So we want to suppress inflammation. But you can see here, the red is blood flow, and greater basically metabolism in that area. And we can infer that neuroplasticity is occurring, right? Which is the reorganization and creation of new neurological connections between cells, strengthening our brain as it improves signaling ability and control over itself in our body. Let's just take this away so you can read it. So that is really important for healing in the brain in anybody, whether it's just aging or function or oxidative stress or concussions, TBI, post-viral infections, surgeries. All these, so many things can impact our brain. Dietary, which is the oxidative stress and things if we're just not taking care of ourselves. So take care of yourself. And here we talk a little bit more about wound healing, but I don't want to go too much into the specifics of it. But you're stimulating all of these things through the genetic expression, right? Once again, it's the DNA impacting these growth factors, and of course you're getting extra oxygen, all that oxygen in, which is creating the energy needed to heal. But you're basically stimulating all stages of wound healing in a really accelerated, really great, efficient fashion. We're stimulating that new blood vessel growth comes in here. Of course, there's the increased oxygen we talked about. We're stimulating fibroblasts, which are creating collagen and reducing scarring. Super important in wound healing. I don't want to block that for you, but the fibroblasts, the collagen factors, and then we reduce scarring. And we get the strengthening of collagen and increasing flexibility as the tissue heals, which is really important with hyperbaric. Stimulates osteoblasts, the expression of growth factors and the formation of new bone, and like we talked about. Decreasing cell damage through acting on the regulators of inflammation and reducing oxidative stress, resulting in anti-inflammatory effect. And that's through that gene expression. And that's the long term. What we haven't talked about yet is that it promotes the differentiation and release of stem cells, which are super important in tissue repair. And stem cells are like blank cells that go anywhere in our body that we send them to, and they just turn into whatever we want them to. So it's like a wild card in Uno or some board game. They can turn into anything you want, and they're really important and they're really great. So the more of these we have, which is promoted through hyperbaric, is really awesome. And we talk here. This just kind of goes over the gene expression a little bit, and these are people who've had difficulty with healing wounds, any wound really. If I had any wound, I would want to get in the hyperbaric chamber. It doesn't matter if it's difficult or what it is, but people have difficult healing wounds, post-surgical, any injury, like I said, brain injury, concussion especially, dental procedures, fractures, muscle and joint injury, disc herniation. I've seen all of these do much better after hyperbaric. I use this one a lot. So this one is really tremendous in how brain injury and concussions can be healed much better through hyperbaric, decreasing neuroinflammation, increasing the growth factors, especially the trophic factors we talk about with that. So trophic factors, I don't have a lot of, well, actually, you know what? We're going to go into that next, so I do have a slide for that. But trophic factors are like helper cells that basically guide your and help your neurons connect to one another. That's what we talked about with that neuroplasticity. So it basically they stimulate and they promote neuroplasticity, which is right here. And so, great, I have some stuff on trophic factors there. So that's where that gene modulation comes in. And these are helper molecules that allow a neuron to develop and maintain its connections with its neighbors. Without trophic factors, a brain cell may die. And so after concussion, this is really important. Hyperbaric allows us to have brain perfusion, right? So oxygen perfusion to the brain, blood flow essentially, in neuroprotection by improving blood flow due to neovascularization, increased brain oxygenation. This decreases swelling, which is what edema is, and reduces chronic neuroinflammation through gene expression changes. We talked about the stem cell release. That's also important in the brain. It's important everywhere, and that's important in those neural connections. Increases cerebrospinal fluid flow. So hyperbaric actually increases all fluid flow, which is really cool because it includes our lymphatic system, right? That's our detox centers, our lymph. And it's also cerebrospinal fluid flow, and obviously also your blood, right? So we get more circulation in different areas just because of the pressure. But the cerebrospinal fluid flow is really important because cerebrospinal fluid is what bathes your brain and spinal cord, and actually it delivers a lot of important nutrients and actually removes a lot of waste and other materials that can be damaging to the brain if we leave them there too long. Basically, things that can create oxidative stress. But we see this stuff. There's starting to be studies on more so on Alzheimer's, dementia type cases and Parkinson's and these types of things where we think with Alzheimer's and dementia that this type of cerebrospinal fluid removal is or something's not removing those waste materials and they're building up, whether it's heavy metals or in those cases it's amyloid plaques, beta amyloid plaques in the brain. So that's a different topic, but anyway, we really want that CSF flow going, and we want as much circulation to the brain as possible, so these neurons can be protected. That's the neuroprotective type mechanism we talked about. This also, hyperbaric improves the health of our autonomic nervous system, which we're going to talk about just a little bit next. And so that regulates how much blood flow goes to our brain at any given time. Like we talked about a little bit earlier, we only have so much blood flow, and it can't be everywhere at once, and our brain can't have it all. So we want as much oxygen as we can in that blood flow system to stimulate neurons. And there's also this concept of hyperoxia and hypoxia, kind of this dichotomy here where, when we decrease oxygen to neurons, it actually increases their release of the growth factors and the trophic factors and the things they need to be healthy, because it's protective, right? It's trying to protect itself. But what we find is that with the hyperoxia, or the supersaturated oxygen levels with hyperbaric, it's doing that same thing, which is really interesting. So now we're, with Dr. Schur, who's somebody that works with me, who's a medical doctor, who's a really fantastic and intelligent man and expert in this area. He's working with different mechanisms of reducing pressure and increasing it in different aspects to see if we can maximize, even further this type of stuff. Dr. Harch is doing that, who's a researcher in hyperbaric, really, really fantastic for the field. But yeah, and so here is the autonomic nervous system piece. This one is actually really important It's not something that a lot of people, I think, really understand. But if you can understand that it's like that fight or flight system, and it's also this relaxation digestion system. And what happens is it's a balance between the two. So these guys really want to be balanced. And when they're out of balance, like this, usually it goes that way, right? So sympathetics, our fight or flight system actually goes a lot higher. And we get easily triggered. We're stressed out. We're not getting as good a blood flow to the brain, and different areas. And we're stressed, we're anxious, we're nervous, we're not sleeping well, whatever it might be. But the autonomic nervous system, when it's balanced, promotes really calm and peaceful, and we're digesting well, we're doing all these things really well. You need the sympathetic nervous system. It's really important, but you just don't want it to be unregulated. And so what happens is the hyperbaric balances this system really well. And it does it by kind of exercising this system and strengthening it over time with through blood vessels, because that's what the autonomic nervous system controls the most of, is our vasculature, our blood flow. And it controls how we constrict our blood vessels and dilate them. So if you're people with cold feet and hands, if you've ever been nervous and your hands get cold or feet get cold or whatever, you just don't have good blood flow issues. This is this autonomic nervous system. And we have to have this thing working well, because like we said, we only have so much blood flow to get where we need it to. And when you're with your brain, you want it there fast. And when this nervous system becomes unhealthy, what we see with people is we see brain fog, we see brain fatigue, really, quite quickly. We see processing. We see emotional changes. People are more triggered, and they're just maybe irritable. They're not sleeping well. All of these things that actually we find improve super well with hyperbaric, and it has a lot to do with this system. But once again, we're exercising this system, and we're also healing the brain. So here's a few. Lightheaded and dizzy is a big one with the autonomics. If you stand up fast and you get lightheaded or dizzy, and this happens to you a lot, it's probably the autonomic nervous system, and that's something that could benefit. Not everybody who has problems with the autonomic nervous system have that symptom, but that's kind of, it's your system isn't doing very well if that's happening. So we want to really want to take a look at that and treat that, really. People with migraines, concussions, TBI, those long COVID, long haulers, those are people that have a lot of problems with this system. But really, like, some of the things that I find the most commonly is the brain fog, the dizziness, lightheadedness, when you stand up too fast, or just in general, and the brain fatigue. And then these other things are a little more subtle, but they're there too. And if you're really looking for them, you'll find them probably. But hyperbaric really helps with this one. It's one of my favorite parts of hyperbaric because of the work that I do with concussions and brain injury and migraines. This is the stem cells. We talked about the stem cells. They're blank cells that can turn into anything we want. My best example, like I said, is the wild card in Uno, or any kind of wild card in a card game that you can turn into anything you want. So it's a pretty nice card to have in your pocket. In inflammation, we've talked a lot about inflammation, where let's talk about it just a little bit. Acutely, hyperbaric reduces the inflammation really quickly, and this is like as soon as you start getting in the chamber, and it's in the pressure's increasing. This is what's happening. It's constricting blood vessels, reducing the vessels tearing and leaking, and reducing swelling. So it can really reduce injury. Like for people who have brain injuries, really bad brain injuries and swelling, if you can get them in within like 3 hours, the mortality, these people with, like, I'm not talking about concussions, I'm talking about people who've had terrible injuries, the mortality goes down tremendously. I don't remember what the numbers are, but basically with people who've had concussions or head injuries or really any injury at all, concussion and TBI, they're just injuries to the brain, just no different than like if you bruised your arm. They're bruises to the brain. So surgeries or anything, I try to get people in there as soon as possible. It doesn't have to be within 3 hours. That's just an example of a study that was done, but we try to get them in as soon as possible, But it doesn't matter if you don't get in as soon as possible. We can just, it just takes longer, and that's okay. It still heals. This chronic inflammation that occurs, that's really by changing that gene expression, right? Remember we talked about the genes, the DNA, and they get flipped on. We flip on the genes that promote the good growth factors, and we in the anti-inflammatory, and then suppress inflammation. So not only do we turn on anti-inflammatory, but we suppress pro-inflammatory. So we kind of do it on both ends, which really reduces inflammation, and it's super important. And the neuroinflammation, chronic inflammation associated with neuroinflammation. This is something we see after brain injuries, concussions, infections, toxins, and autoimmune type injury. We work with a lot of patients with MS and other types of autoimmune type aspects that work really well. And lastly, I just touch on the anti-aging. This is something that people ask me about a lot. There's a lot of things I could talk about, but I've already talked a lot about a lot of aspects of this. But really, my goal is to get you to understand what's going on. So with anti-aging, what we saw was telomeres lengthened. And telomeres are really important. They're the science of it is that the tandem nucleotide repeats at the end of each chromosome. Basically, they maintain the genomic stability. Basically, as they shorten as we age. So as we age, they shorten. What we noticed with these is with hyperbaric, they lengthened. So that's why they're calling it this anti-aging piece. We're actually seeing that, gosh, if we can actually make our cells healthier, then, and reduce and increase the length of these things, can we live longer? Or at least live healthier, live better, which is really neat. And there's a study here if you want to read more about it. It's just down here. But they also reduced senescent cells, which is really cool. These are cells that they're kind of in this stage of arrest, where it can be caused by the tumor shortening, but other things too, just age related and oxidative stress and whatever else. But the accumulation of these is associated with not so good stuff like cancer and dementia and those types of things, and so is the decrease in the telomere length associated with that. So we really want longer telomeres and shorter and less senescent cells, and that's what hyperbaric was able to show us that it accomplished through this study. So it's really neat. There's a lot more to come here in studies, but we're really working on things that can be helpful. It's important to understand there's a lot more research that is being done, needs to be done, but the cool thing is that we're doing it now, and it's coming on as a major role in healthcare as we move forward, and it's really exciting. And we're going to be working with what doses work best for certain things. For instance, the chambers that we use are in the 1.3 to 1.5 atmosphere range, and they are the best for neurological conditions. And so that's been shown thus far. But we get tremendous results with concussion and brain injury patients. We also get amazing results with any wound injury, because like I said, that's just the case. But they're very safe, and they're very effective. Now, you do have to do it a lot to get the most benefit, but you can get a lot of benefit from doing it once, and that's the thing. So it just really depends on your condition and what your goals are, and that's something that I talk about with a lot of our patients. And yeah, so that's what we have. And if you want more information, just check out New England Hyperbaric Oxygen. I'd be happy to help. Hope you enjoyed it and didn't put you to sleep. Thank you.